Well, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all for coming. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the Treaty 6 lands. We pay our respects to the histories, language, and culture of our First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant communities. Following the election last spring, Premier Smith mandated me as the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services to implement a number of measures to ensure Albertans are safe and protected in their homes and in our communities. That mandate was driven by the fact that residents have a right to feel protected and safe in their everyday lives. That is why today I am proud to introduce the Public Safety Statutes Amendment Act 2024. What the name lacks in style, it makes up in substance. If passed, this legislation will fulfill two key mandate items intended to protect Albertans, hold violent criminals accountable, and respond to the evolving public safety needs of our communities. The first key element of this legislation involves amending the Corrections Act to pave the way for a provincial ankle bracelet program for violent and sexual offenders and people out on bail. The Federal Liberal NDP Alliance, Bill C-75, have created an environment in Canada where repeat violent offenders and organized crime have been able to thrive with little to no consequences. Our federal justice system is not holding criminals accountable for their actions and letting the public suffer the consequences. Alberta's government cannot sit idly by, and as I have said many times before, enough is enough. This legislation would make electronic monitoring a tool for courts to monitor those considered at risk to public safety while out on bail or serving a sentence in the community. Secondly, amendments to existing legislation will enable the creation of an independent agency that will be responsible for the police-like functions that the Alberta Sheriffs have taken on. As the organization's mandate and policing in general has evolved over the years, since these cover two separate mandates, let's begin with the Oversight Independent Police Service Agency. I think it is very important to state immediately that in the clearest terms possible that this legislation does not create a provincial police service in replace of the RCMP. Our aim here is to bring the police-like functions that the Alberta Sheriffs have taken on over time under the same kind of legislative framework and civilian oversight as Alberta's police services. The role of the Sheriff's Branch has changed incrementally over the years as the public safety needs and expectations of the community in Alberta have changed. These amendments will ensure that these police-like functions will be aligned with the legislation governing policing and are carried out by an independent agency that falls squarely under that legislation. The sheriffs will also carry out these functions in a way that is transparent and accountable, something that Albertans expect of all their police services. Doing this will support our work to strengthen the current policing model and augment the efforts of Alberta's police services, whether it's the RCMP or First Nations police services, municipal police services. The Sheriff's Branch of today is a much different organization than the one that started out as the old CAPS service, which stood for Court and Prisoner Security. In the early 2000s, the provincial government significantly expanded the size and role of this organization by establishing the Sheriff Traffic Operations, the forerunner of today's Sheriff Highway Patrol. Nearly 2 decades later, it's hard to imagine a time when the sheriffs weren't providing a reassuring presence in our community and in our provincial highways alongside the RCMP. Expanding the Sheriff Highway Patrol's authority to include impaired driving investigations in 2021 is a shining example of how augmenting our police model has boosted public safety. This growth is related to versatility. And it's this versatility that makes the Sheriff Highway Patrol an integral part in law enforcement in Alberta to help protect Albertans since 2021. The Sheriff Highway Patrol has removed nearly 4,000 impaired drivers from the provincial highways. That's an unqualified success story. As I've said many times before, when someone calls 911, I expect someone to show up to the call, regardless of the uniform that they wear. In addition to making Alberta's highways safer by immediately removing impaired drivers from the road, the Sheriff's Highway Patrol enforcement efforts help the RCMP to keep units on patrol and available to respond to other incidents. Successes like that prompted the government to look at more ways of supporting Alberta's police services and allow them to free up more resources for core frontline functions. And like any responsible government should, we have been looking at our legislation to ensure that it's keeping pace with the modern and evolving public safety needs of our province. That's what prompted us to undertake the first major overhaul of Alberta's Police Act in more than 30 years, passing a series of reforms at the end of 2022. In taking a similar look at the main legislation that governs the Alberta Sheriffs, the Peace Officer Act, we determined it hasn't fully kept up with the expanding mandate of the Alberta Sheriffs. The work that we're now doing with this legislation will help us to better respond to future requests by enabling the creation of a new independent agency police service that can operate seamlessly in the policing environment and perform a variety of policing functions throughout the province. This agency would be able to take on more of those specialized police-like functions that the sheriffs have been taking on over the years. That includes functions like the past year when we deployed Alberta Sheriffs to the Calgary and Edmonton to augment and support the efforts of the local police in dealing with crime and social disorder in the inner city. Other communities have expressed interest in similar arrangements, and it's reasonable to expect that similar requests will occur in the future. It makes sense that when these officers are operating in the same environment as the police, that they are subject to the same level of oversight and accountability. This legislation will create a civilian oversight board for the independent policing agency, providing a similar kind of governance that exists for municipal and First Nations police services. This civilian oversight board will also ensure that just like every police service in Alberta, the new agency will conduct day-to-day operations independently from the government with no direct involvement from elected officials. This is not to say the Alberta Sheriffs have been performing these police-like functions in a legal or operational vacuum up until now. There are agreements, standard operating procedures, information sharing, real-time communications to ensure that sheriffs are working hand in hand with the police of jurisdiction in all of these areas. This legislation is about meeting the changing public safety needs of our communities, anticipating the future needs, and fulfilling the public's evolving expectations concerning accountability and oversight. As we talk about the need to adapt and respond to changing public safety landscape, we must not forget about the responding to supporting victimized communities. With many now, should I say, fearful of being victimized in the course of day-to-day life, it's clear that deterring violent crime, especially on the part of people out on bail and offenders on community release, is essential for maintaining public safety and stability in our streets. When an offender poses a danger to the community, we need to be able to take reasonable precautions to reduce that risk. There is no place in Alberta for criminals, and Alberta's government will do whatever it takes to keep Albertans safe. A revolving door that perpetuates a cycle of release and reoffends benefits no one. This is why that we are taking this action. Our courts need to have additional tools to respond appropriately to mitigate the threat posed by people with histories of violent crime and, of course, sexual violence. For some, this demands uninterrupted 24/7 monitoring. To that end, this legislation will also pave the way for the creation of an ankle bracelet electronic monitoring program for adult offenders and individuals out on bail deemed likely to reoffend while in the community. This additional tool in the toolbox for the courts is a common sense measure to keep a closer eye on those whose release is considered by the courts to pose a significant risk to the public safety. Albertans deserve to feel safe in their communities and to be protected from repeat violent offenders. And with Federal Bill C-48 now brought into force, we're cautiously optimistic that this is going to bring meaningful and much needed change. However, our government will not sit idly by. We are taking action now to ensure that people are protected in their communities and feel safe where they live, work, and play. So let me be clear. This is a decision created in response to the bail system crisis created by the Federal Liberal NDP Alliance by providing our courts with the option to add electronic GPS monitoring as a condition for offenders and people out on bail, especially those with histories of committing physical and sexual violence. We're strengthening community supervision and increasing accountability while on release. Ankle bracelet electronic monitoring will protect vulnerable Albertans too by helping to secure offender-restricted areas such as victims' residences, places of employment, or any other area deemed off-limits as part of the individual's bail or community release conditions. Once in place, electronic monitoring will build an already existing supervision strategy that incorporates ongoing reporting, engagement with local police, community supports and programming, and other methods to prevent a person from reoffending in the community. Where feasible, additional support from the Alberta Sheriffs will help to ensure that round-the-clock community supervision works hand-in-hand with the agile law enforcement response when individuals violate their release or bail conditions. With rollout and implementation expected to begin this fall, ankle bracelet electronic monitoring will bolster monitoring methods already employed in the province and be a major asset in maintaining and promoting community safety. Of course, there's no guarantee that an ankle bracelet will stop a person from committing a crime while on a bail or violating the conditions of their release. But by coupling increased individual accountability with ongoing monitoring, we're going to deter many offenders from making poor choices in the community. When the public safety is at stake, we're going to do whatever it takes to protect Albertans and help ensure their peace of mind. Tackling complex public safety issues requires partnerships. It also requires fresh ideas that we're going to follow through with. With this legislation, we're laying the foundation for stronger partnerships among law enforcement agencies and giving authorities an effective new tool in the toolbox for holding violent offenders accountable and preventing them from re-victimizing law-abiding citizens. This is an important part of our ongoing work to ensuring that we're going to do whatever we can to help Albertans stay safe no matter where they live. So thank you all for coming here, and I am happy to take some questions.
So this brings us to our Q&A portion of the press conference. I'd like to remind reporters that all materials and answers are embargoed until the bill is introduced at 3 p.m. in the House. So we'll start. We do have some people on the phone, but we'll start here in the room. If we can, you can go ahead, Janet.
Can you paint us a picture of your vision for what this new police agency would look like related to the sheriffs? Like, do you see the sheriffs still existing, some sheriffs moving into the police service? And like, would they require any additional training to serve in this police service as compared to somebody who remains as a sheriff?
So to answer the last part of your question, yes, they will require some training. So just for the record, right now the sheriffs are peace officers. So I think it's important for everyone, including, your readers and listeners, to understand there is a difference between a peace officer and a police officer. And, as we stated in my my speech, we've seen an evolution of these peace officers over the course of several years, and they're taking on more and more roles. It really functions as police officers, working hand in hand with municipal police services, with the RCMP as an example. We have our SCAN teams, Safe Community and Neighborhood teams that are working very closely with them. We had the deployment of sheriffs in Calgary and Edmonton. Peace officers, again, I always try to stress, there is a distinguished difference between a peace officer and a police officer. And, if in the future we do need some assistance in large municipalities or even some of the smaller municipalities that have request sheriff assistance, they will not need a police officer to be with them. So giving them those additional authorities and powers and training gives them the ability to help out any municipality that requires support. So again, I state this as I've stated for many, or at least the last year or so. We're trying to augment and support the current police services that we have here in the province, not just the RCMP, but even our local municipal police services.
Are you transitioning sheriffs to become police officers, or are you maintaining the sheriff service as it is and building up a police agency? Like, I'm trying to understand this.
There's going to be a police agency. So yes, I guess to answer your question, there is going to be an independent civilian oversight board that is going to establish a police service, and that's what the legislation is doing. And yes, some of those, I can't guarantee everybody, but some of those officers that are out there right now, and some of you have heard me say this before, especially those who are the Highway Patrol as an example. Those are the closest thing to a police officer without being a police officer. You know, with the additional training, members like that, if they pass the training, I got to say this, nothing is ever guaranteed, right? We always have to pass the training. Those officers would transition into a police role.
We'll take another question from the floor. Catherine, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so because this is enabling legislation, none of this is really spelled out, so there's no timeline. There's
No.
nothing in the budget for this, and this will all be done through an order in council, so it'll all be in cabinet, not in the legislature. Why this way?
Well, we have to create the police service, right? So like, it's not for me to create a police service, right? That's why we have to create the independent oversight, right? Which is what the importance of having this independent board. Then they're the ones that are going to start laying that foundation and creating the police service, right? You can take the existing officers that we have right now. There obviously is a base amongst our sheriffs, and they will establish the base going forward.
And then on the ankle monitoring, I'm trying to understand, because right now there's ankle monitoring by the Correctional Services of Canada for federal offenders, and then we have some provincial that is done by a private service, and so what we're doing here is bringing it under Alberta Correctional Services. But so how is that going to change, like, for federal offenders, those high-risk offenders? Do you get to take over that?
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is that again, this is, I think we have to understand this. It's not about me or even Minister Amory, right? It's about a tool in the toolbox for the judges to use. And we just make sure that so we're providing that service through corrections, obviously through Corrections Alberta, right? Sorry, maybe we'll get back to an answer in the relationship between what the federal government is doing, and I don't have the answer to that. But I would just say this, from an Alberta government perspective, a tool in the toolbox for those judges. Obviously, a request would come in via the Crown Prosecutor or maybe the defense or a combination of both. But we're just setting up the system so that there can be a tool in the toolbox for them, if that makes any sense.
And we'll take another question from the floor. Jonathan, you can go ahead.
Sure. While you'll be moving forward with an independent police agency, the Alberta RCMP will remain the province's policing unit. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on bringing in a provincial police force?
Well, as I've indicated before, there's no decision that has been made in regards to a independent provincial police force for Alberta, other than we have the current RCMP, as I've said. But you know, I've also said that we have to explore all options, and this is why we had those grants that have gone out to, I believe, at least 20 some odd communities throughout Alberta. And right now, they're slowly coming in, but we are assessing the situation to see what's going to best for their communities. I've had a wide range of opinions on this. I've had everything from communities indicating that they're content with the current service that we're providing. I've had saying that they're not content with the service that we're providing. So, as I've said, I've tried to empower the municipalities to let me know what they want. And right now, the information is coming in. So just simple answer, no decision has been made.
Okay. One benefit you bring to the role is your past experience as a Calgary Police Service officer. How did your time as a CPS officer influence your positions today?
Well, you know, there's three pillars here where I always talk about: education, prevention, and intervention. And I say that that's something that we can implement in pretty much any ministry. But I think for a lot of it, it has to do with my understanding of police operations. I used to be an incident commander, as one of the jobs that I had in the Calgary Police Service. But it was also the understanding of dealing with people with complex needs, right? Which is why you see me as, you know, for lack of a better word, a bit of a leader, will say, in dealing with people with severe mental health and addictions issues, and understanding the compassion for that. So I think that my 10 years on the street and experience has brought quite a bit to the table, and I think that is something, you know, as I go back to my notes again, when somebody calls 911, I expect somebody to show up, and I do not care what the uniform is, and that to me is the #1 priority.
We do have time for another question on the floor. Go ahead.
Can you give us a precise example of what a new police officer under this new agency will be able to do that the peace officer or a sheriff can't do right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's that distinguish between a peace officer and a police officer, right? So the peace officer, their powers are limited in scope by really the powers that are granted to them by essentially the Minister of Public Safety, which happens to be me. So again, you can have somebody who does parking authority, who's technically a peace officer. You can have somebody that is doing transit, as an example, who's a peace officer, or in our case, some of these sheriffs, who also are peace officers as well. The police officer has the full scope of local bylaws, provincial acts, and of course, criminal code, right? So again, peace officers somewhat limited in their powers, right? The police officer, you know, for lack of a better word, is not limited in their powers and has the ability to do that. And as we have asked the sheriffs to do more and more and more, work with police officers, again, augment and support the RCMP, ask them to back officers up on calls, or if they're the closest to a call, be the first one out to that call. We're essentially asking them to perform duties that are probably within the scope of being a police officer.
And you've been quite clear that you don't think this is a provincial police force, but it is a police force that will have agents all across the province, funded by the province.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between this new police agency you're creating and a provincial police force?
Well, look, I think it's important to know that we're still assessing what is going on here in Alberta. Again, we've had about 20 plus municipalities that have indicated that they're looking at something different than what they have, including our First Nations folks as well, right? So we have Siksika Nation, we have Enoch First Nation. They're looking at something different than the current model that they have right now. As far as the sheriffs are concerned, I mean, again, we're gonna build out the scope of what their entire role is going to be. And you know, I've had some municipalities that have indicated to me that they're interested in having the sheriffs as their policing service, as an example, right? So, and the needs of that community or those communities do not supersede the needs of those communities that prefer the RCMP, just as an example. So I'm taking no sides on this, but as I've said before, it would be negligent on my part if I didn't prepare myself for any type of scenario. And maybe that's part of the training that I have as a police officer. I always have to prepare myself for multiple scenarios. And, you know, I've said this before, this is no secret. The federal government has give us many signal checks that they're not sure, right? So Public Safety Canada, so we have to separate Public Safety Canada from the RCMP. Public Safety Canada may not be interested in continuing with contract policing. This is why you're seeing Saskatchewan. So it's not like you were even first out of the gate here. Saskatchewan has already gone the road of creating a marshal service, which would be their marshal police service, right, in their community as well. So, you know, we just got to prepare for every option.
We do have time for one more question on the floor. Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, Minister, you're going to great pains to say that, you know, this is not going to replace the RCMP, but you're doing everything to lay the groundwork here. So why don't you just come out and say that this is what the government is intending on doing, is replacing the RCMP with your own provincial police force?
As I've said, I have to be prepared for every scenario. So if Public Safety Canada all of a sudden comes and says, you know what, we've listened to the all-party committee, we've analyzed the situation, we may not be interested in continuing with contract policing anymore in the future, and then what? You're going to question me and say, Minister, why didn't you prepare for this? Why weren't you preparing for this possible scenario? Good question, right? So we are going to augment and support the RCMP. That has been our commitment, right? We are continuing to ask these peace officers who are sheriffs, who have badges, who carry guns, who drive police cars or peace officer cars, we ask them to perform the duties. So it is important that we have a civilian oversight to monitor the work that they are doing. That is critical, right? There shouldn't be politicians involved in this, right? We're trying to separate that. If you're performing duties as police officers, then you need to have that independent oversight.
Do you have a
One of the reasons we're doing that. Go ahead, Michelle.
I mean,
Yeah.
just as a side
Yeah.
note, I mean, do you really think the federal government would just pull the plug immediately? There'd be a transition time, right, for the RCMP? But my follow-up is that there have been a lot of municipalities that are opposed to this and have written letters to the government about this. So what would you say to them about what you're doing?
Well, I encourage them to take the $30,000 grant, number one, and analyze to see what is best for your community. And there are some communities that have been steadfast in sitting there and saying, we're happy with our police service. That's fine. Again, I'm trying to empower the communities here. It's not the heavy-handed government coming in and saying, I'm coming in and telling you what to do. I'm empowering you to do what is best for your community. But let me just say this as well. This is not, when we talk about some of the challenges, we'll say, that the RCMP are having as an example, this is not because the province is not supporting our RCMP. Of course we are, right? I mean, budget 2024, we have an additional $20.9 million, communities covered by Provincial Police Service Act, right? There's been historic investment added, but more than 500 civilian officer positions and civilian and officer positions to the RCMP detachments throughout Alberta since 2020. So certainly we're doing this. But when I talk to other provinces throughout this country that have contract policing, they're having similar concerns when it comes to HR. The provinces have indicated to me that who have contract policing, no different than some of the municipalities in Alberta that have indicated to me here in Alberta, is that they're short on the number that they're supposed to have. So as I have said before, the RCMP just do not have enough human beings to police Canada. Regardless of the amount of money that we give them, they're having trouble from a hiring perspective. And that's a challenge. I get that. But I can't wait for them to just continue to try to figure stuff out. Again, when somebody calls 911, no different than you or anybody else in this room calls 911, I expect somebody to show up to that call. And sadly, in certain areas, that has been a bit of a challenge. So if you have a sheriff that is close by, who's a fully trained police officer, time is of the essence in these type of situations. I expect that officer to show up, not to sit there and say, well, I'm going to have to wait. I know I'm close by. I know I look like a police officer. I act like a police officer, but I'm going to spend 20 minutes explaining to you that I'm not a police officer. And while the actual police officer is a half hour to 45 minutes away, that's not acceptable, right? So I expect people that look like police, that act like police. I expect you to be police, and I expect you to show up to the call.
We're going to head to the phones right now. We have time for one more question. Operator, could you please put through the first caller?
Alexander Dwally, Rebel News.
Thank you, Minister, for taking my questions. Regarding the creation of the Independent Civilian Oversight Commission, how will they ensure that remains balanced and apolitical, especially when subsequent governments take power?
Well, to be honest with you, there'll be no elected officials on there. So, if you look at police commissions throughout Alberta right now in municipalities, there's usually some elected official from the city that's on there. This oversight body, which is why we're calling it an oversight body, is not going to have any elected people on there.
Did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I did. And what's the anticipated timeline for the rollout of the expanded sheriff's roles, given that it will require more training resources and members?
Well, sorry, I wish I had a better answer for you on that. I mean, really, that is the first step is to create the independent oversight body, and then obviously there's going to be we're continuing to assess the situation. Transition costs, of course, operating expenses, training equipment, governance, all that sort of stuff is something that is currently in the works. Like, we just have to get this legislation through first.
That's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and if you have any follow-up questions, you can follow up me via email. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.